The Ableton vocoder. Certainly one of my favorite elements that you can use in Ableton. It's something that I use quite frequently in a lot of my new music. I figured it was about time I made another sound design video. It's been way too long since I made any kind of production related stuff, so I figured I'd do something for fun now. Here's some cool things you can do with the Ableton vocoder. So, neurobases. For the sake of this, I'll be using Serum just because it's easier to use, but I am just going to be using 2 saw waves, so you can recreate this yourself fairly easily if you'd like. Of course, grab our vocoder. Let's detune these apart from each other a little bit. So basically how the vocoder works, it takes your signal and throws it through a bunch of these frequencies, which are then thrown through a bunch of bandpass filters. So if we take a look at this little band section down here, you can actually change the number of bands. For this scenario, I will be using only 4 because that's how we get kind of the most wet sort of sound that we're looking for. The interesting thing that can come from this is if you start changing the bandwidth, it throws the signal through a bunch of bandpass filters, and the bandwidth, all it does is change the actual width of each bandpass filter. But right now it's being thrown through 4 bandpass filters, and I'm going to set the bandwidth all the way down to 0, and now we have like perfect for wet sounds like that. So definitely try using the modulator mode and bends to kind of make bunch of wet neurobases. It's really fun. So another thing the Ableton vocoder is good for is sustain basses. So let's go ahead and take like basic shapes. Let's grab a square, take our vocoder and throw it on here. Set it to modulator mode yet again, and the release time all the way down. Now I will direct your attention back to the bandwidth. We're gonna not set the bands to 4 this time, but rather a higher amount. So let's try maybe 16 or so. And when we start lowering the bandwidth, you start to get these really weird metallic artifacts. I'm not an audio expert and I'm not sure exactly how it works, but all I know is that this is the sound that results from it. Now we're left with these weird metallic sounds, I guess. What's really cool though is when you begin to cut out all of these low frequencies. You can do this by using a frequency shifter rather than an EQ. I'm gonna frequency shift it down like a whole bunch, and what this does, rather than cutting out the low frequencies, it basically shifts down the low frequencies somewhere so far that it's inaudible across the frequency spectrum. Now we have... This is where it starts to get extremely interesting. Basically, these 2 amounts, the range, sets the cutoff for how far down the signal will be affected by it. If this signal that I'm using has a bunch of low frequencies and I set the range to this to really high, it's basically going to cut everything below that frequency. So if I set this all the way up, now we're left with... And that's literally all coming from a single square wave. Or even change the band amount. Now you can start to get some really weird metallic stuff. Another cool thing I can show you how to do is create this weird vocoder artifact glitch effect. I don't even remember the process that was going through my head when I was making it. Rather than recreating it, I can simply walk you through it. Called weird metallic vocoder thingy. For this, you might want to use like some random percussion-y sounds. So before and after. It sounds like weird and muffled like that because it really depends on the sample you're using. If you begin to automate this frequency, that can kind of fix the fine tuning, but it's rather in the sample itself. So as I pitch this up, you're gonna hear how this rack is beginning to affect it. Let's stretch this out. Basically this is done with a lot of compression. I'll just walk through each effect. We have the vocoder, which is set to a very low bandwidth. I have the gate up to kind of tone down on those random low frequencies that kind of show up. Whenever you use the vocoder, it has a tendency to create all these random sort of like low kind of artifacts that like ring throughout. They're like, oh, and those are not fun to deal with. Then I have a fat rack to kind of compress it, get that sound. Then we have the frequency shifter, as I mentioned earlier, frequency shifting it down really low to get rid of those low frequencies. Now we have another frequency shifter to kind of fine tune it. Finally, another fat rack, which is basically amplifying the sound and giving it some stereo width, and another fat rack to do the same. All of these little weird techniques and stuff is stuff that can probably easily be recreated in other vocoder effects or other vocoder plugins. It doesn't have to be Ableton specific. If you do find some cool ways to use this in FL or other DAWs, please let me know. I'm genuinely interested to see what you guys could come up with. But yeah, hope this short little kind of video explaining some of my creative process and explaining cool ways to use stupid things can come in handy. And I will see you guys later. Hope you guys enjoy.